You know that feeling when someone says something so small, so offhand, but it sticks with you like a splinter you can't pull out? It happened to me one Sunday morning. My mum, casually, over coffee, said, "You know, Nathan, you really need to start thinking about your future more seriously. You're almost 20 now. Time flies." At the time, I didn't think much of it. Sure, I had just finished high school and was working part-time at a local cafe, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. But looking back, I know that was the moment. That tiny, almost innocent remark was the crack in the wall I didn't know. Was there the moment that would shatter everything in a way I couldn't predict? Then came Quinn. I met her at a coffee shop a few months later. She was this quiet, kind of reserved girl who always had a book with her. I could never get over how her eyes always lit up when she talked about something she was passionate about, whether it was a random novel she'd just read or something as simple as the weather. I didn't know it then, but I would spend the next several years learning about her and slowly realizing just how much she was changing my life. It wasn't long before we started dating. We had this easy, natural rhythm together. I loved the way she didn't need to fill every silence with words, how we could just be. She didn't judge me for not knowing what I was doing with my life, and I didn't judge her for having dreams that felt a bit too far out of reach at times. We understood each other, and that was rare. A few months into our relationship, Quinn came to me with news that would change everything. She was pregnant. At first, it didn't register. I thought surely she was mistaken. I mean, I had always been cautious, right? We talked about things like that, didn't we? But there she was, sitting across from me, holding a pregnancy test in her trembling hands. The air in the room felt thick, and it wasn't just from the overwhelming smell of coffee. My mind was spinning. But at the same time, everything felt like it was in slow motion. Quinn was calm. She looked at me with those same eyes, the ones I had fallen for, and said, "We're going to figure this out, Nathan. We can do this." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us. About a family. I could see it in her eyes, the sincerity, the certainty. But the panic was still there, lingering. I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure I could be ready. That night, I did what anyone does when faced with something they don't know how to handle. I went to my parents. Maybe they would have the answers. Or at least, tell me what I was supposed to do. I'll never forget the look on my dad's face when I told him. It wasn't anger. Not exactly. It was more like disappointment, but without words. His eyes seemed to search my face, as if trying to find something, some sign that this wasn't happening, that I was joking or confused. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "You're too young for this, Nathan," he said. "You haven't even finished school. What will the neighbors think? What will your future look like?" I wanted to tell him that none of that mattered, that the future didn't feel so important when I was holding Quinn's hand, realizing we had a child on the way. But I didn't. Instead, I just stood there, frozen, as my mum joined in. "You've embarrassed us," she said, eyes narrowing, her voice shaking slightly. "This isn't the life we raised you for. You're supposed to focus on your future, not this. What will your father's friends think? What about the family name?" Her words stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. Family honor. Those two words hung in the air like an accusation. I had always thought family was about love and support, not living up to some unspoken standard that none of us had ever agreed to. I tried to speak, to tell them it wasn't like that. But my dad cut me off. "You're going to end this, Nathan. For your own good. For your future. This is not the life we want for you." I could feel the weight of those words sinking into my chest. And in that moment, I realized that they weren't just speaking for themselves. They were speaking for the expectations of the entire family, the legacy they thought I was supposed to carry. And they didn't care that I was in love with Quinn, or that we were going to have a baby. All that mattered was what they thought was best. The decision wasn't easy, but I made it. I walked away from Quinn. I told her it was over. I told her that we couldn't be together. Not because I didn't love her, but because my parents made it clear that my future depended on me choosing them, choosing family over everything else. The days that followed were filled with a deep sense of loss. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. I told myself I was doing the right thing. I told myself it was about securing my future, about following the path that would lead to something better, something more stable. But every time I thought about Quinn, every time I thought about our child, something inside me cracked. I wasn't ready to be a father, but I wasn't ready to leave them either. Weeks went by. I kept my distance, buried myself in my studies, and tried to avoid thinking about Quinn or the life we could have had. I pushed all of that to the back of my mind and focused on making my parents happy. I tried to be the son they wanted, the son they thought I should be, but the emptiness kept growing. And then months later came the phone call. "Your son's name is Andrew," Quinn said, her voice calm, but I could hear the unspoken words between hers. "He's yours, Nathan." I didn't know what to feel. I didn't know what I could do. But I knew that everything I had worked so hard to bury was suddenly back on the surface. The fog of a borrowed life? It's funny how life can move so quickly when you're not really looking. How things seem to settle into routines even when you haven't fully processed them. After I made the decision to leave Quinn, I tried to just keep moving forward. as if I could outrun the pain. Maybe I thought that if I could just stay busy enough, I wouldn't have to face what I'd done. I remember the first few weeks after we broke up. It wasn't a clean cut. I didn't just walk away and forget about her. I kept thinking about her and Andrew, wondering how they were, what they were doing, but at the same time I pushed those thoughts aside. I didn't want to feel guilty. I didn't want to let my mind spiral back into the mess I'd created. So I dove into school. I enrolled in college, not because I had some deep passion for it, but because it was the logical next step. I didn't know what I was doing with my life, but at least I was doing something. I got a job at a tech startup, mainly because it seemed like something that would make my parents happy. They were proud of me. At least they acted like they were, and I could see them smile when they talked about my future. I wasn't the golden child. Valentina, my sister, was always the one who excelled at everything, always the one who made the family proud. But I had a role. I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. But everything felt off. There were moments in the quiet of the night when I'd catch myself thinking about Andrew, imagining what he might look like now. I hadn't seen him since the day Quinn called me, telling me his name. That was years ago now. And I hadn't been there. Not once. Sometimes I'd hear people at work talk about their kids, about their families, and I'd feel this little tug in my chest, this pang of regret that I couldn't shake. But I buried it. I buried it deep, telling myself that this was the life I had to accept. I was doing the right thing. I was focusing on my future. It was like living in a fog, honestly. I'd go to work, go to school, do what I needed to do. I had friends, but they didn't know about Quinn, didn't know about Andrew. I kept them at arm's length. The fewer people who knew, the easier it was to pretend that everything was fine. But then something strange happened. I was at a family gathering, my parents, Valentina, my aunt and uncle, the usual crew, and my mum casually mentioned something. It wasn't directed at me specifically, but it was enough to make me stop mid-bite. She said, I'm so glad Nathan's focusing on his career now. He's really doing well for himself. I could tell she was proud of me, but it didn't feel like pride. It felt like a check mark, like she was ticking off a box on her list of things she thought I should be. And I realized something. I was just playing a part in their story. I wasn't living my own life. I was living the life they thought I should have. I don't think I ever voiced this to anyone, but I felt like I was dying a little inside every time they talked about how well I was doing. It was all on the surface. The reality was that I hadn't truly been happy since I walked away from Quinn. I couldn't stop wondering about Andrew, about how he was doing, who he was becoming. What kind of father would I have been if I hadn't let my parents dictate my life? There was this lingering sense of guilt that followed me everywhere. I started making excuses to not go home for family events, or even to call my parents. I just couldn't be around them anymore. The truth was that I felt like a stranger in my own life. The life they wanted for me wasn't the life I had imagined for myself. A year passed, then another. I'd gotten better at pretending, better at silencing the thoughts that crept in at night. I had a girlfriend. Her name was Cora, and things were fine. She was smart, sweet, but we didn't really talk about anything deeper. It was comfortable, but it wasn't the kind of relationship that left me wondering what could have been. I tried to tell myself I was happy. I tried to believe that I had everything figured out, but deep down I knew the truth. I was missing something. It was the phone call that finally broke the dam. It came in the middle of the night. I wasn't expecting it, and at first I thought it was a mistake. The number wasn't familiar, and I was half asleep when I picked up. "Hello?" I asked, groggy. A soft, familiar voice replied, "Nathan, it's Quinn." I didn't know what to say. My heart started pounding in my chest. What could she possibly want from me now, after all these years? I had kept my distance, and she had kept hers. But then she said the one thing that completely threw me off balance. "I've been thinking a lot, and Andrew, he wants to meet you." My world stopped. Andrew, my son. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't seen him in years, hadn't been part of his life at all, and now here I was being told that he wanted to meet me. I didn't know what to say. I felt a mix of guilt, fear, and excitement, all colliding into one overwhelming wave. Quinn was silent for a moment, as if waiting for me to process what she just said. "I understand if you don't want to, Nathan, but I think it's time. For him, for you, for both of you." The line went dead after that. She didn't say goodbye, didn't wait for me to respond, but I didn't need her to. I knew what this meant. I had a son, and he wanted to meet me. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't hide behind the life I had built. This was real, and whether I was ready for it or not, it was time for me to face the consequences of my decisions. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew I had to see Andrew, for him and for me. A reckoning at the doorstep. I knew something was off the moment they showed up at my door. It wasn't just the knock, it was the timing. The heavy thud of the doorbell echoed through my apartment, and for a split second, I thought I might have been imagining it. But when I opened the door, there they were, my parents. The first thing I noticed was how they looked. They had both aged, yes, But it was more than that. There was something desperate in their eyes. Something I'd never seen before. My mum, normally composed and controlled, looked like she had just run a marathon. Dad, who always carried himself with quiet authority, had his shoulders hunched, his gaze downcast. They stood there awkwardly, holding a bouquet of flowers like they were trying to make up for years of silence with a single, fragile gesture. But what caught my attention wasn't the flowers. It was the way my mum hesitated before speaking. We need to talk, Nathan," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. I didn't invite them in immediately. I stood there for a few moments, processing. What were they doing here? After all these years? After everything that had happened, they just showed up? I couldn't deny that a part of me wanted to slam the door in their faces. I had spent years building a life without them, without their judgments, and now they were here, asking to be part of it. But the other part of me, the part that had been holding on to the idea of a family, even though I had been running from it, was curious. I couldn't stop myself from stepping aside and letting them in. They sat down in the living room as if they belonged there, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The silence between us was thick, uncomfortable. I tried to brace myself for whatever they were about to say, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. "We want to meet Andrew," my dad said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your son?" The words hit me like a punch. I didn't know how to react. I had tried so hard to bury the guilt, to move past what I had done. And now here they were, asking for something I wasn't sure I could give them. I didn't even know if Andrew wanted to meet them. I was angry, so angry. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel a strange pull, a temptation to let them back into my life. It would have been easier to just say no, to send them away, and protect what little was left of my peace. But I couldn't do it, not this time. "I'll ask him," I said, my voice betraying a hint of frustration. "But I don't think you understand. He's not just some project for you to fix. He's a person, and I've been the one who's raised him." They both looked at me, but my mum's face twisted with something like regret. "We know, Nathan, but we've had time to think about it, and we're sorry. We should have been there for you, for both of you." It was hard to listen to. Sorry didn't cut it. Sorry didn't make up for years of absence, for the weight of their expectations that had crushed me into making decisions I couldn't undo. They hadn't been there for me, for Quinn, or for Andrew. They had been absent, all for the sake of their precious honor. And now, they wanted back in. It was almost laughable. But then something in me snapped. I wasn't the scared kid anymore. I wasn't the one who had to live by their rules. And this was my chance to take control. "I'll arrange it," I said, standing up, my decision made. "But I think it's time for a little honesty, don't you?" They exchanged a glance. My dad opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. "I'm not doing this on your terms anymore. You're going to hear what I've been through, what we've been through, before you meet him. You don't get to just waltz back in like nothing happened." I could see the moment when it hit them. My mum's face paled slightly, but she nodded slowly, understanding that this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. I left them sitting there and grabbed my phone. I called Quinn, not sure how I felt about what I was about to ask. "Quinn," I said, my voice tight, "I need to talk to Andrew. Are you still open to him meeting my parents?" There was a pause on the other end. When Quinn spoke again, her voice was calm, but firm. "I don't know, Nathan. You left us for years. I don't know if Andrew is ready for all of that." I knew she was right. It wasn't just my decision, but part of me wanted to show my parents what they had missed, what they had lost. This wasn't just about reuniting with Andrew. It was about revenge, about forcing them to confront the consequences of their actions. "I think it's time for them to face what they've done, for them to see what they missed out on," I said, the words coming out more bitter than I intended. Quinn hesitated again. "I'll talk to him, but Nathan, if you push this, I don't know how he'll react." I hung up the phone, the weight of what I had set in motion sinking in, but there was no going back now. The following week, Andrew agreed to meet them, but when they showed up, it wasn't the joyful reunion they might have been hoping for. They arrived at my apartment looking just as they had before, but I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. This wasn't the family they remembered. This was a man, a father, who had been forced to grow up quickly, a man who wasn't going to bend to their will anymore. Andrew, tall now, walked in behind me. He looked so much like me, but with Quinn's eyes, those calm, piercing eyes that had always seemed so knowing. He shook their hands, but the expression on his face was anything but welcoming. He wasn't angry, but he wasn't forgiving either. My mum tried to speak, but Andrew cut her off. "I don't know who you think you are," he said, his voice steady, "but I'm not here to make you feel better. I'm here because my father wants me to be." The air in the room froze. My parents stood there, stunned, unsure of what to say. I watched them. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had won. Not because I had succeeded in making them feel guilty, but because I had finally taken control. I had forced them to look at the damage they had caused. I wasn't just their son anymore. I was someone who had built a life without them. And now they would have to deal with the consequences. The look on my mum's face as she realized this, as she processed the distance between them and Andrew, was almost too much for her to bear. She paled, her knees buckling just as she tried to say something. She fainted, collapsing into my arms. It felt like justice, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free.